In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Well, let me start out this morning by recalling for you the last words of the reading from Mark's Gospel that we heard last Sunday. It was the story of Jesus' rejection by his hometown neighbors. You might recall that after that very unpleasant encounter, Jesus sent the disciples out to the nearby villages to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of heaven. He gave them the authority over unclean spirits, and they did just as Jesus had instructed them. Remember these words: they cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. In other words, their outing proved successful, and many heard and believed the good news that Jesus was proclaiming. Well, now let's turn to today. The story that we just read isn't a pretty one. In fact, it's a story of utmost depravity and evil. Not only does Herod have John the Baptist's head chopped off, he prances around with it on a platter. Now, this bloodthirsty story of John's death is recorded in all three of the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, that seems to be a fact that suggests that it's important. So perhaps we need to take a moment this morning to see if there is in this story a lesson that just might have something to say to us this morning. Now, the story of John's martyrdom is a story set inside another story. Remember, Mark has been telling the story of Jesus sending the 12 on a mission. And it turned out to be a very successful mission. And then Mark interrupts this story to tell the story of John's terrible death at the hands of Herod. The same Herod, by the way, who would, according to Luke's Gospel, turn Jesus over to the Romans to be crucified. He was not a very nice man. But after telling us this gruesome story, Mark returns to the story of the 12 disciples, which he concludes with these words. The apostles gathered together to Jesus, and they told him all things, whatever they had done and whatever they had taught. So the question seems to be, why would Mark start telling a big success story and then interrupt it with a terrible story of John's death? Maybe Mark is trying to say, look, terrible things happen. But don't be fooled, Mark seems to be saying. That's not the whole story. Something important is going on in the background while John is being martyred. And that something is that even in the worst of circumstances, God is still there with us, helping us overcome evil. Mark is saying, yes, terrible things happen, but wonderful things happen as well. And the wonderful things always can and do overcome the terrible. This story of John's death, set inside that story of the apostles' successful mission, promises us that God is with us. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that life is always easy. Mark is reminding us that bad things happen, that bad things happen even to good people. John the Baptist wasn't doing anything wrong when he was so brutally murdered. He was doing something right. And even Herod sensed that. Now, in the background of the story of John's beheading, the apostles were out there on their mission, preaching, calling people to repentance, casting out demons, and healing the sick. God was not absent, and evil was not winning. Yes, one good man was being killed, but dozens, or perhaps even more, were hearing the good news of God's love. Mark's church, I think, needed to hear this. By the time Mark wrote his gospel, the church had already been suffering terrible persecutions. Christians were being imprisoned, maybe even killed. Not because they had done anything wrong, but because they had done something right. I believe that Mark wrote this story within a story to reassure them. Yes, bad things were happening, but they should not doubt that good things were also happening. God was at work in the world, and everything would come out right, they prayed, in the end. We need to hear this message too. If life was difficult for the Christians in Mark's day, it is often difficult for us as well. We are living in a very troubling, precarious, and polarizing time. Is this what Mark is trying to tell us with this story, within a story? The story of John the Baptist's death, set inside the story of the apostles' successful mission. Mark, it seems to be telling us that if we walk in faith, God will transform our travails into blessings. He's telling us not to lose hope, even in the midst of the most terrible circumstances, because God is always at work in our world. And being an optimist at heart, I believe good will prevail.